Hi everyone, welcome to Studio 203. My name is Aneesa and I'll be sharing some of my thoughts about the California Fibers Historical References exhibition. This exhibition is currently on view through March 28th, so if you'd like to come down in person, please make an appointment on our website. If you're not able to come in person, the entire exhibition is also online. You can see everyone's individual artworks along with their artist statements about each piece and how it references history and it references this theme as well. So before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about my thoughts on why this exhibition came together and how we came up with the theme within the California Fibers members. So all of the art here is by California Fibers members, and I'm also a fiber artist as well, so I'm part of this group. And we had a little discussion earlier this year, late last year, about kind of thinking about the politics of art history and the inclusion or exclusion of fiber art within that discussion, and thinking about referencing personal histories, right? We were all in the pandemic, spending a lot of time in our own heads, and doing a lot of reflecting and that type of a thing. So this exhibition is really the culmination of all of those ideas and thoughts, and it really allowed me to play with this idea of creating an alternative reality within, right, the canonical art history, and thinking about what if fiber was the predominant medium rather than painting or sculpture, and what that would look like in Western art history especially, and how how artists would use that type of medium to replicate all civilization, right, from Paleolithic era, the cave paintings, and all of the small textile fragments from other ancient civilizations and that type of thing, all the way up through modern art and contemporary art as well. So thinking on that, right, I was very visually inspired by the Nelson Atkins Museum, which is in Kansas City. I went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and anyone who knows the area knows it's right across the street, really easy to access. So I'd spend a lot of my time in undergrad walking through their exhibitions, thinking about their curation, right, and looking at museology and curatorial theory, right, through their lens. In this institutional setting. So a lot of my visual organization was based on their visual organization, and just remembering how the old building, right, the first building that they have made out of marble and beautiful columns and all of that houses a lot of the ancient and pre-medieval type of work, as well as all the way up through Renaissance, Baroque, right, modern art. Alongside, right, the build of the block building next to it, the more contemporary art building where the rotating exhibitions are, where the fresh new art or fresh exhibitions are, and this idea of newness next to the oldness, and thinking through history in that type of a way. So we're going to start at the beginning of time, actually, over here in the older section of the gallery, I guess. And so this first piece is by Debbie Weiss, and it really reminded me of the Coptic weaving fragments that were found in Egypt and dug up by archaeologists, and how museums will take the fragments and the conservators will stitch it onto another fabric to keep it intact and to keep it safe for years to come. So really thinking about how, right, there's this piece and then she wove around and adhered everything and mounted everything. And you can read her statement about it. It's a lot different than what I read into it, but it's still really beautiful. She has a poem as well. I highly recommend reading all of the artist statements. And related to this is Michael Rohde's Boro, which is a tapestry piece. He does a lot of tapestry weaving and hand dyes all of his own yarn. So thinking on the idea of Boro in Japanese culture, and how mending with indigo fabrics and restoring old garments or old textiles and giving new life and also structure to them, but in this mode of tapestry rather than sewing or applique, as the traditional way is. And then over here we have Marilyn Chafee, and she has created a tartan redux where she has taken her family tartan plaid, right, and reimagined it into this contemporary context, right, and used her voice and her material and her way of working into this really beautiful quilted piece, very reminiscent of modern quilts, right, and still referencing the old world, or the self-identity of the tartan plaids in history. So then over here we have more referencing history, obviously. So this is actually my piece, and this is Cameron Taylor Brown's piece. Both are referencing landscapes on the planet Earth, right? And Cameron's is part of her Threads of Time series, where she is taking photos on her journeys around the world and transferring them and printing them onto fabric, weaving a base and really combining weaving and surface design and texture and expressing the memory of the places that she's visited. So this is another one in that series. And my work is very similar in this type of way. I use reclaimed fabric, and so I'm referencing one of the citadels in Lebanon. When I went in 2017 to visit my family, we did a lot of touring of the countryside. So you can see the reference photo that I took online. So you can see kind of what I was inspired by, but then also what image came out of it with my memory combining with the piece itself. Excuse me. So over here we have Peggy Wiedemann, and I really enjoyed both of these pieces. Both of these she submitted for the blind jury, and I really saw them as kind of a diptych, especially with the past year that we've had, right? With the mask and then ceasefire, the mask really resembling the pandemic and the collective need that we've had to wear masks and to protect ourselves, protect others. But then also the ceasefire, right? This toy gun also reminded me of all the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in June and are ongoing and continue. And so just thinking about how these objects represent our present, but also look found, right? She uses found objects, uses cordage, basketry, that type of a thing. And so could essentially have been dug up by archaeologists in the past, or thinking about in the future when people dig up all of the objects that we have currently today. And so really thinking about how these represent the past, the present, the future, all at the same time simultaneously. And so next we have Gail Fraser, and this is Rachel Carson's song. So she has created this kind of memorial structure to remember Rachel Carson's work on researching DDT and the effects that it has on wildlife and human life, and really thinking about how a lot of her work is left undone, right? We still have a lot more to go with that, and fixing our reliance on DDT, but also we've all experienced the global pandemic and how it's definitely tied to the fact that we need to be stewards of our environment. We need to remember to take care of our planet and be kind to it and not let it fall apart. So these two pieces are really beautiful. I love this little moment between them. This one is Brescia Karlovic Logan's, and this is Lydia Teo Hall's. And Brescia's really references her hometown, growing up in Arizona, thinking about how indigenous peoples inhabited the land and had their own stories and experiences in the land, and then settlers come in and add their own stories and their own perceptions to the land. And so thinking through all these different layers, all the way up through the present. You can read her statement, it's really nice. It sums it up a lot better than what I have said. And then Lydia, of course, is referencing Ruth Asawa and all of her sculptural vessels and the wire, and really thinking about Ruth's techniques and playing with it, and playing with that type of a form as well. There are also 2 other pieces by Lydia on the website for the online exhibition portion that are not in person, so be sure to check those out as well. Also expanding on the Ruth Asawa techniques, but with Lydia's own voice and her own imagery and subject matter as well. So over here, we're going to go to the newer section, and we're going to start with Carrie Burkle. So Carrie's work is an homage to Ed Rosbach, and specifically referencing this vinyl tape lace that he had made. It's really incredible. You should definitely look it up. And so thinking through this idea of creating textiles through unconventional materials, but also, right, unconventional forms. So lace is definitely a 3-dimensional object, right? It's made with thread, using hook, right, using your hands. And so this is a different take on it. It still looks 3-dimensional, right, because of the offset print that she's used, but it's definitely a 3-dimensional image mounted on, or 2-dimensional image, and mounted on a 3-dimensional stretcher. So just kind of playing with the optics of that, which I really like. And then of course, right, the subtle pop art reference with the multiples and the silkscreen printing. So with this, we have paired Carol Nelson's Homage to Diebenkorn, which really beautifully captures the idea of brush strokes and the idea of painting, but it's entirely quilted, it's entirely pieced, right? Everything is fabric, layers of like sheer fabric, layers of opaque fabric. It's really rich, especially in person. There's the light shimmer that you get when you turn your head or move back and forth with the piece. And you can definitely read her statement as well. Everyone's statement's on the website. And then we have in here the corner of kind of surrealist art and people thinking on those types of themes. Linda Anderson first. So she is thinking on, right, the illusionist type of thing, like M.C. Escher, right? Like, what are you looking at? And like building world within a world within a world. And you can also see the hand coming in, like Salvador Dali has in a lot of his paintings, the landscapes that are, you know, barren, but also have the subject matter, referencing the self, right? Herself making the piece, and the piece inside the piece inside the piece, really interesting. And so this is another similar, different take on surrealism, also referencing mythology. This one is Charlotte Bird Sedna, and Sedna is the Inuit goddess of the sea. So here she is surrounded by all of these creatures under the ocean. She lives under the ocean, cradling the hunters, right, who need to hunt these animals to survive and to provide for their families. So this really beautiful symmetry, and then also like huge goddess imagery, right? Like she is bigger than the animals and she does take care of all. And then thinking about Kathy Nita's work, who also references a little bit, again, the surrealist nature of creating a narrative within the plane of reference and just thinking through, right, like all of these things are happening simultaneously, and the depth of field is really crushed into on the surface. And so everything is happening all at once, right, on top of one another. And this is called One of My Kind. You can read her statement. It's really interesting. You can definitely see what her inspiration was within this piece, but really quickly thinking about generations and how they feed into one another, or, you know, how we continue to give birth to generations, continue to, you know, fight with one another, need one another, that type of a thing, relationships. And so this piece is by Polly Giacchina, and it is referencing Giacometti's The Nose. Her piece is called The Head, And if you know the piece, or if you don't, you can go on the website and look at her reference that she was inspired by. They're very similar in structure, but I love how Polly took her own perspective on this idea of creating a head with really long nose. And so she used random weave. She does a lot of basketry and a lot of woodwork and that type of a thing. So really beautiful iteration of the piece, The Nose, by Giacometti. And then over here we have Rebecca Smith after Lenore. So this is inspired by Lenore Tawney's work. The specific piece is on our website. You can see, click back and forth to see her inspiration. But again, very, very similar to Lenore Tawney's work with the gauzy, with the really thick tapestry lines illustrating and giving it life. So really beautiful. And over here we have another piece by Gail Fraser, and this one is called The Gathering Ground. When I first saw this, I really thought, when I saw the image of it, not the one in person, but when I saw the image, I really thought of the Pissarro piece that is at the Nelson Atkins that I spent a lot of time looking at. It's an Impressionist piece, and it's really dimensional, built up with paint. And so Gail's is really dimensional as well, built up with fiber, built up with paper, objects that she's found, thread, that type of a thing. And instead of Impressionism, she's referencing someone from the Hudson River School. And you can see the exact painting on the website and see her inspiration for that. And then last but not least, we have Susan Henry. And this piece is called Cityscape. It is made entirely of men's trousers, recycled men's wool trousers, and she has done shibori dye and discharge and pieced everything together. And this piece really spoke to me in how formalist, like modern quilt it seemed, and then also her statement discusses being inspired by skyscrapers and how skyscrapers were, being built in Chicago in the 40s, and thinking through all of those layers while creating the composition for this piece. And you can really see, right, the skyscraper skyline in this piece as well. So that's it for our exhibition. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to see more, you can follow us on Instagram at the Studio 203. You can go on our website, check out the full exhibition with all the statements online, and subscribe to our newsletter if you enjoy our programming and like to see more. All right, thanks for joining us.